Before we dive into the story, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit like and subscribe for more heart-touching tales. Wishing you a beautiful day now. Sit back and enjoy the story. The ivory silk felt like a shroud against Victoria Sterling's skin as she stared at her reflection in the towering mirror. Every hand-woven pearl caught the late afternoon light streaming through the mansion's Gothic windows, creating patterns that danced across her face like tears she refused to shed. The diamond tiara 5 generations of Sterling women had worn it sat heavy on her auburn hair, a crown that felt more like shackles. Behind her, the suite door groaned under 3 sharp knocks. "Victoria, darling, it's time." Harold Sterling's voice carried the weight of empire, the kind of authority that had bent steel mills to his will and politicians to their knees. Today it would bend his daughter into a marriage that would merge to fortunes and secure his legacy forever. She had met Richard Blackstone exactly 3 times. 3 carefully orchestrated dinners where he'd spoken about her beauty the way he might appraise a racehorse. His kisses on her hand lingered too long, calculating, as if he were already tallying the millions their union would generate. "Just a moment, father." Through the window, 500 guests filled the garden in a sea of silk and summer suits. White roses cascaded from every surface, their perfume thick enough to choke on. The string quartet played something saccharine that made her stomach turn. Photographers prowled between the chairs like predators, ready to capture the fairy tale that magazines would feast on for months. Victoria's hands trembled as she reached for the car keys hidden in her dresser drawer. The silk shoes came off. With violent kicks, she gathered the waterfall of fabric around her waist and slipped toward the servants' staircase. Her bare feet silent on the marble, the garage smelled of motor oil and freedom. Her silver Porsche gleamed under the fluorescent lights, a 21st birthday gift that had been more chain than present. The engine roared to life just as the first raindrops spattered against the windshield. By the time she reached the highway, the storm had unleashed its fury. Rain hammered the car like accusations, and the wedding dress bunched around her legs made driving treacherous. She pressed harder on the accelerator anyway, chasing the horizon and whatever lay beyond her father's reach. The winding country road carved through dense forest, and with each mile the weight on her chest grew lighter. Behind her, she imagined the chaos erupting in the garden. Harold Sterling's face would be granite, his fury white-hot but contained. Richard would be calculating his losses, perhaps already considering which Sterling asset might serve as compensation. Lightning split the sky in brilliant forks, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the earth's foundation. The Porsche's wipers fought a losing battle against the downpour, and visibility dropped to mere feet ahead. It happened on a sharp curve where the road bent around a massive oak. The car hit standing water and went into a sickening slide. Victoria fought the wheel, but physics had already claimed victory. The world spun in a kaleidoscope of rain and trees before the sickening crunch of metal meeting timber brought everything to a stop. Silence. Then the drumming of rain on the crumpled roof. Blood traced a thin line down Victoria's chin, and her head throbbed with each heartbeat. Steam rose from the destroyed engine like incense from a funeral pyre. Her phone showed no signal, and the road stretched empty in both directions. For the first time in 24 years, Victoria Sterling was truly alone. Through the rain and gathering darkness, a warm glow beckoned from deep within the forest. It pulsed like a heartbeat, promising shelter and perhaps salvation. Victoria gathered her soaked dress and stumbled through mud and undergrowth toward the light, thorns catching the silk and leaving it in ribbons. The building materialized from the gloom like something from a dream. Mitchell's fine woodworking read the weathered sign beside a heavy oak door. Through rain-streaked windows, she glimpsed workbenches laden with tools and furniture in various stages of rebirth. The warm light came from old-fashioned lanterns swaying gently from the rafters. Victoria hesitated. In her world, problems were solved with phone calls and checkbooks, not by knocking on strangers' doors in the middle of nowhere, but standing there in her ruined wedding dress, shivering as rain soaked through to her bones. She had no other choice. Her first knock was tentative. The second, desperate. When the door finally swung open, Victoria's breath caught in her throat. The man before her was nothing like the polished predators of her social circle, tall and broad-shouldered. With calloused hands that spoke of honest work and gentle brown eyes that held depths she wanted to drown in. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and he wore simple clothes that somehow made him more attractive than any tailored suit ever could. "Good Lord," he said, taking in her bedraggled appearance. "Are you hurt? What happened?" "I crashed," Victoria stammered through chattering teeth. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I didn't know where else to go." Without hesitation, he stepped aside and ushered her into the warm workshop. "Don't apologize. You look half frozen." "I'm James Mitchell." Victoria paused, realizing this was her chance to shed her skin entirely, to become someone unburdened by the weight of the sterling name and all its expectations. "Emma," she said, the lie tasting like freedom on her tongue. "Emma Harper." James draped a clean towel around her shoulders and guided her to a chair beside a wood-burning stove. The warmth hit her like a benediction, and for the first time in hours, she could breathe without feeling like she was drowning. As James bustled about making coffee, Victoria studied the workshop with wonder. Every piece of furniture was a masterwork, restored with a care and attention that spoke of true artistry. The smell of wood shavings and linseed oil created an atmosphere of peace she had never experienced in her father's sterile mansion. "This is beautiful work," she said, running her fingers along a handcrafted jewelry box. James looked pleased but modest. "Just a hobby that got out of hand. Used to work construction, but after my wife died, I needed something quieter. Something I could do while taking care of my daughter." Words hit Victoria like a physical blow. This man had suffered real loss, real pain, yet he had opened his door to a stranger without question. She felt suddenly ashamed of her own problems, her privileged rebellion against a life of luxury. "You have a daughter, Sophie? She's 7, staying with my sister tonight. Lucky for you, or she'd have peppered you with 1,000 questions by now." For the first time in days, Victoria smiled genuinely. There was something about James that made her feel safe, accepted for who she was, rather than what she represented. He handed her a steaming mug of coffee and settled into a chair across from her. "So, Emma Harper," he said, his voice warm with curiosity, "what brings you out in a wedding dress during the worst storm of the year?" Victoria took a sip of coffee and felt warmth spread through her chest. Outside, the storm raged on, but here, in this sanctuary of honest work and genuine kindness, she felt something she had never experienced before. She felt like she might finally be home. "It's a long story," she said softly. "I've got all night," James replied. And she believed he meant it, as Victoria began to craft her carefully edited tale of escape from an arranged marriage. She realized she was about to embark on the greatest deception of her life. For the first time, she would discover who she really was when stripped of everything that had defined her since birth. Victoria Sterling was gone. Consumed by the storm and the wreckage on the dark road, Emma Harper was just beginning. 3 weeks had passed since Victoria Sterling died in a storm, and Emma Harper was born in a woodworker's shop. She had woven herself into the fabric of James and Sophie's life so seamlessly that some mornings she forgot who she used to be. Forgetting was a mercy she hadn't expected. "Miss Emma, look what I made for you." Sophie burst through the workshop door, her honey-colored braids bouncing with excitement. She clutched a paper flower crown crafted from construction paper and dreams. "Mrs. Peterson taught us how to make them in art class." Victoria knelt so Sophie could place the crown on her head, feeling more regal in that moment than she ever had wearing real diamonds. The child's small hands were gentle, reverent, as if she were crowning a queen. "It's absolutely beautiful, sweetheart."
"I'll treasure it always."
From his workbench, James watched with an expression that made Victoria's heart skip. She had learned to read the subtle shifts in his face, the way his eyes softened when he looked at his daughter, the small smile that played at his lips when he caught Victoria in unguarded moments with Sophie. "How's the restoration coming along?" Victoria asked, approaching the antique secretary desk that had consumed James's attention for the past week. Slowly but surely, he ran his hand along the newly refinished surface, with the same tenderness he might use to comfort a wounded bird. previous owner really didn't take care of it properly. See these water stains? Someone tried to paint over the original finish. Victoria examined the piece with eyes trained by years of studying her father's collection. Beneath James's careful work lay something exceptional, possibly dating to the early 1800s. In her former world, this desk would have commanded tens of thousands at auction. "It's going to be magnificent when you're finished," she said, and meant it. James looked up from his work, catching something in her voice. "You know furniture? Really know it? I mean, where'd you learn that?" The question hit her like cold water. Victoria had grown careless, letting her true self bleed through the Emma Harper facade. "My grandmother collected antiques. She taught me to appreciate quality craftsmanship." It was partly true. Harold Sterling's mother had indeed been a collector, though she'd paid experts to do her appreciating for her. The lie tasted bitter, but James accepted it with a nod. "She sounds like a wise woman."
She was.
Victoria said, surprised by the genuine grief in her voice. Her grandmother had been the only person in the Sterling mansion who had ever asked Victoria what she wanted, rather than telling her what she needed. That evening, as they sat around James's kitchen table sharing a dinner of homemade pasta and salad from the garden, Victoria felt the dangerous warmth of belonging. Sophie chattered about her upcoming school play, gesticulating wildly with her fork until James gently reminded her about table manners. "Will you come watch me, Miss Emma? I'm playing a sunflower in the garden scene." "I wouldn't miss it for the world," Victoria said, then caught James's eye across the table. He was studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. After Sophie was tucked into bed with 3 stories and 4 glasses of water, James and Victoria found themselves alone on the front porch. The evening air was thick with the scent of honeysuckle and the promise of rain. James had brought out 2 beers, condensation beating on the bottles like tears. "Can I ask you something?" "Emma." Victoria's stomach clenched. "Of course. That first night when you crashed, you said you were running from an arranged marriage. But there's more to it, isn't there?" The beer turned to ash in her mouth. "What do you mean?" "The way you carry yourself. The way you know things." "Dress you were wearing?" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "It wasn't from a department store." Victoria set down her beer with hands that trembled only slightly. "No, it wasn't. So who are you really, Emma Harper?" The question hung between them like a blade. Victoria could feel the moment balanced on a knife's edge. She could tell him the truth and watch everything she had built here crumble to dust. Or she could dig the lie deeper, bury Victoria Sterling so completely that she might never claw her way back to the surface. "I grew up with money," she said finally. "More than I knew what to do with. My father arranged my marriage to seal a business deal, and I couldn't go through with it. I ran, and I kept running until I ended up here." It was true enough to pass for honesty, vague enough to hide the magnitude of her deception. James reached across the space between their chairs and took her hand. His palm was warm, calloused from honest work, and she had never been touched with such gentleness. "I'm glad you ran," he said simply. "I'm glad you ended up here." Victoria's heart hammered against her ribs. "James, I know you're still running from something, but these past 3 weeks, watching you with Sophie, being with you..." He stopped, struggling for words. "I haven't felt this alive since Sarah died." The name hit Victoria like a physical blow. Sarah, his wife. The woman whose memory she was competing with, whose place she was trying to fill with lies and borrowed identity. "Tell me about her," Victoria whispered. James's grip on her hand tightened. "She was everything good in the world. Kind, funny, patient with my moods when the construction work got too hard on my back. She wanted nothing more than to be a mother, and when Sophie finally came, his voice broke. Cancer took her when Sophie was too young to remember her mother's voice." Victoria felt tears burning her eyes.
Ow.
Here was real pain, real loss. And she was poisoning it with her presence, her lies, her selfish need to play house with someone else's life. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words inadequate, but all she had. "Don't be sorry. Just don't run again, Emma. Not from this." Before she could respond, James leaned across the space between them and kissed her. His lips were soft, hesitant at first, then growing more certain as she kissed him back. Victoria felt herself drowning in the sweetness of it, the pure honesty of his touch. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Victoria rested her forehead against his. "James, there are things about me you don't know, things that might change how you feel. Everyone has a past, Emma. What matters is what we do with our future." The words were meant to comfort, but they lodged in Victoria's chest like shards of glass. Because her past wasn't just mistakes and regrets. Her past was headlines and manhunts, private investigators and a father who would burn down forests to find his missing daughter. As if summoned by her fears, her phone buzzed against her hip. She had kept it turned off for weeks, but tonight she had made the mistake of powering it up to check the weather. 17 missed calls from Harold Sterling, 43 text messages, and one voicemail that made her blood turn to ice. "Victoria, this foolishness has gone on long enough. I know about the carpenter and the child. Come home now or I'll bring you home. Don't make me choose between your reputation and your happiness. We both know how that ends." Victoria's hand shook so violently she nearly dropped the phone. James was watching her with growing concern. "Emma, what is it? You look like you've seen a ghost." Victoria Sterling had seen a ghost. And now that ghost was reaching across the void to drag her back to a life she thought she had escaped forever. "I need to go," she whispered, standing so abruptly that her chair toppled backward. "Go? Go where?" "Emma, talk to me."
Dad.
Was already backing away, her mind racing with terrible calculations. Harold Sterling knew where she was, which meant he knew about James, about Sophie, and which meant everyone she had come to love was now in danger. "I'm sorry," she said, the words torn from her throat like a confession. "I'm so sorry, James." Ran then, as she had run from her wedding, as she had run from everything that tried to hold her. But this time, she wasn't running toward freedom. She was running toward a choice that would destroy either the people she loved or the woman she was trying to become. Behind her, James called her name into the darkness, but Victoria Harper didn't exist anymore. She was Victoria Sterling again. And Victoria Sterling had just learned that love was the most dangerous prison of all. Victoria drove through the night with tears streaming down her face, her knuckles white on the steering wheel of James's old pickup truck. She had taken it without asking, adding theft to her growing list of crimes against the man who had saved her. The voicemail played on repeat in her mind, Harold Sterling's voice cutting through her skull like broken glass. "I know about the carpenter and the child. She should have kept driving, should have disappeared into another state, another identity. Let Emma Harper die as completely as Victoria Sterling had. Instead, she found herself parked outside the Sterling mansion at dawn, staring up at the Gothic spires that had been her prison for 24 years. The gates recognized her biometric signature and swung open with mechanical precision. The circular driveway was empty except for Harold's Bentley and a black sedan she didn't recognize. Victoria's hands trembled as she turned off the engine. She had made it 3 steps toward the front door when it opened. Harold Sterling stood, framed in the doorway like an avenging angel carved from marble in spite. At 62, he commanded the same authority that had built an empire from nothing and bent the world to his will. His steel-gray hair was perfectly styled despite the early hour, his charcoal suit without a wrinkle. Victoria. Her name on his. Lips sounded like a verdict. "Father." He stepped aside to let her pass, and Victoria found herself in the familiar oppression of the mansion's foyer. Nothing had changed. The oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors still glowered from their frames.
Ow.
The marble floor still echoed with the ghosts of her childhood footsteps. "We have much to discuss," Harold said, leading her toward his study. Room smelled of leather and cigars and the weight of power. Behind his massive desk sat a man Victoria didn't recognize, though something about his predatory smile made her skin crawl. "Victoria, meet Marcus Webb, private investigator. Has been quite helpful in locating you." Webb rose from his chair with fluid grace, extending a hand Victoria didn't take. He was younger than her father, perhaps 45, with silver threading. Through his dark hair and eyes like chips of winter ice, "Miss Sterling, you've led us quite a chase." "I wasn't hiding," Victoria said, though they all knew it was a lie. Harold moved to the window, hands clasped behind his back in a gesture. "Victoria, remembered from childhood. It meant he was about to deliver a punishment disguised as a lesson. 3 weeks, Victoria. 3 weeks of scandal and speculation. Do you have any idea what your little tantrum has cost me? I don't care. You will. Harold turned back to face. Her and Victoria saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Fear. The Blackstone deal is worth $400 million. The merger was contingent on our family alliance. Richard has been patient, but his patience has limits. Then let him find someone else to buy. It doesn't work that way, and you know it. Harold's voice dropped to the dangerous quiet that had made grown men weep. Your reputation affects the family name. The family name affects our business relationships. Our business relationships affect everything. Webb cleared his throat. Perhaps I should show her the photographs. Victoria's blood turned to ice. What photographs? Webb produced a manila envelope from his briefcase and spread its contents across Harold's desk. Victoria's knees nearly buckled. There she was, laughing. With Sophie in the garden behind James's house, kissing James on the front porch, playing the part of a woman she had never been and could never be. James Mitchell, Webb said, his voice clinical, widower, single father, owns a small woodworking business that barely breaks even. Has no idea who you really are, of course. You bastard, Victoria whispered. Language, Victoria, Harold said mildly. Though I suppose 3 weeks of slumming have affected your manners as well as your judgment. Victoria snatched the photographs from the desk, clutching them to her chest. You will not hurt them. Do you hear me? You will not touch them, hurt them? Harold laughed, the sound like breaking glass. My dear daughter, I don't need to hurt them. I simply need to expose them. Webb leaned forward, enjoying himself. One phone call to the local newspaper. Billionaire heiress Victoria Sterling found living in sin with small-town carpenter. The story writes itself. James Mitchell will be front-page news by tomorrow morning. Victoria felt the walls closing in. He doesn't deserve that. Neither does his daughter. No, they don't, Harold agreed. But that's not my concern. My concern is getting my daughter married to Richard Blackstone and securing the future of this family. I won't do it. You will. Harold's voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Because the alternative is watching your carpenter and his child become casualties of your selfishness. Victoria closed her eyes, seeing James's face in the darkness behind her lids. The way he looked at her like she was precious, not valuable. The way Sophie called her Miss Emma and saved her best drawings. They had given her a home, and now that home would be destroyed because of who she was. There is another option, Webb said quietly. Victoria opened her eyes. What? Marry me instead? The words hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Harold's eyebrows rose slightly, but he didn't look surprised. Victoria realized this had been planned from the beginning. Has made a very generous offer, Harold said. His private investigation firm has connections that could be quite beneficial to our interests. The financial arrangements are favorable, and he understands the nature of strategic marriages. Webb smiled, and Victoria saw herself reflected in his cold eyes like a specimen in a jar. I'm not looking for love, Miss Sterling. I'm looking for a beautiful, intelligent wife who understands that marriage is a business arrangement. You would have your freedom within reasonable limits. All I ask in return is your name and your presence at necessary social functions. Victoria studied the man who was offering to buy her like a racehorse. And James, Sophie, would never know who you really were, Webb said. As far as they're concerned, Emma Harper simply disappeared. People do that sometimes, run away from lives that don't fit. They'd grieve for a while, then move on. It would be kinder, really, Harold added. Better than the alternative? Victoria felt something die inside her chest. You've thought of everything. I always do. The study door opened, and Victoria turned to see a ghost walk into the room. Richard Blackstone stood in the doorway, impeccably dressed as always, his shark smile firmly in place. Victoria, darling? So good to see you again, Richard. Her voice came out as a whisper. I heard about your little adventure. Quite romantic, really. Though I confess I'm disappointed you chose to audition other men before our wedding. Victoria wanted to kill him. The urge was so strong her hands actually twitched toward his throat. Offer still stands, of course, Richard continued, moving into the room with predatory grace, though the terms have changed somewhat, given the circumstances. What circumstances? Victoria asked, though she dreaded the answer. Richard produced his phone and showed her the screen. A news article from that morning. Sterling heiress missing. FBI joined search. It seems your father reported you kidnapped 3 days ago, Richard said. Federal crime? That... Of course, when you turn up safe and sound, there will be questions about where you've been. With whom? The trap closed. Around Victoria like the jaws of some prehistoric beast. If she was officially missing, presumed kidnapped, then her reappearance would trigger investigations. Background checks on everyone she had been in contact with. James and Sophie would be pulled into a media circus that would destroy their quiet life. So you see, Harold said, settling behind his desk like a spider in its web, your options have narrowed considerably. Marry Richard as planned, marry Marcus under more flexible terms, or watch everyone you claim to care about burn in the spotlight of your selfishness. Victoria looked at the 3 men who held her future in their hands. Her father, who had sold her to the highest bidder. Richard, who wanted to own her like a trophy. Webb, who would use her as a beautiful mask to hide whatever darkness lived behind his winter eyes. None of them saw her as human. To them she was a commodity to be traded, a problem to be solved, a prize to be won. But James had seen her as a woman. Sophie had seen her as a friend. They had given her something she had never possessed in 24 years of privilege and wealth. They had given her choice. Victoria straightened her shoulders and looked her father in the eye. I need time to decide. You have until tomorrow morning, Harold said. The wedding is set for next Saturday. One way or another, you will be walking down an aisle. Victoria nodded and turned toward the door, her spine straight in her head. Hi. But inside, her heart was breaking into pieces sharp enough to cut. She had found paradise in a woodworker's shop. And now, she would have to burn it down to save it. Behind her, she heard Webb's voice, smooth as poison. Excellent choice. Miss Sterling, I think we're going to be very happy together. Victoria didn't trust herself to speak. She walked out of the study, through the oppressive foyer, and into the morning light that felt cold as winter on her skin. Tomorrow, she would choose her prison. Tonight, she would say goodbye to the only happiness she had ever known. Victoria sat in James's truck outside Sophie's school, watching 7-year-olds pour through the doors like bright flowers escaping a greenhouse. She had been there for an hour, paralyzed by the weight of what she was about to do. The photographs Webb had shown her were scattered across the passenger seat, each one a nail in the coffin of Emma Harper. Sophie emerged from the crowd of children, her honey-colored braids bouncing as she skipped toward the pickup truck she recognized. When she saw Victoria behind the wheel, her face lit up like sunrise. Miss Emma, why are you here? Is Daddy with you? Victoria's heart shattered a little more as Sophie climbed into the passenger's seat, carefully gathering the photographs without looking at them. Just me today, sweetheart. I thought we could spend some time together before your dad gets home from work. Can we get ice cream? Daddy says I can have ice cream on special days. This is definitely a special day, Victoria said, her voice thick with unshed tears. They drove to the small ice cream parlor on Main Street, and Victoria watched Sophie demolish a double-scoop strawberry cone while chattering about her upcoming school play. The little girl had no idea this was goodbye, that tomorrow Miss Emma would vanish as completely as if she had never existed. Will you really come see me be a sunflower? Sophie asked, vanilla ice cream painting her upper lip white. I wouldn't. Miss it for the world, Victoria lied, the words cutting her throat raw. When they returned to James's house, Victoria helped Sophie with her homework at the kitchen table, memorizing every detail. The way Sophie chewed her pencil eraser when she was thinking. The careful concentration on her face as she worked through math problems. The trust in her eyes when she looked up for help. James arrived home at 6:30, sawdust in his hair, and smile lines crinkling around his eyes when he saw them together. How are my 2 favorite girls? Miss Emma picked me up from school and bought me ice cream, Sophie announced. She said it was a special day. James caught Victoria's eye across the room, and she saw questions there. Concern, love that made. Her want to throw herself into his arms and confess everything. Instead, she smiled. Every day with you 2 is special. After dinner, After Sophie's bath and bedtime stories, Victoria and James found themselves alone on the front porch again. The night air was thick with the promise of rain, and Victoria wondered if storms would always remind her of the night she had stumbled into this impossible dream. "You were quiet tonight," James said, settling into the chair beside her. "Everything okay?" Victoria turned to face him, memorizing the strong line of his jaw. The gentle brown eyes that had seen through her from the beginning, the calloused hands that had held her like she was made of spun glass and starlight. "James, there's something I need to tell you. Sounds serious? It is." Victoria took a shaking breath, half to leave. The words fell between them like stones into still water, sending ripples of silence in all directions. "Leave." James's voice was carefully controlled. For how long? For good. Victoria watched something die in his eyes, the same something that had died in her chest 3 days ago when she saw those photographs. "I don't understand. I thought this meant something to you." "It does. It means everything." "Then why?" Victoria had rehearsed this conversation 100 times, crafting lies that would make her departure easier for him to accept. She could tell him she was married, that her husband had found her. She could tell him she was sick, dying, saving him the pain of watching her fade. She could tell him anything except the truth. Instead, she found herself reaching for his hands, holding them like anchors in the storm that was about to break over their heads. "Because staying will destroy you, both of you." "Let me decide what destroys me, Emma." The name hit her like a physical blow. "My name isn't Emma." James went very still. "What?" "My name is Victoria Sterling. I'm Harold Sterling's daughter. The steel fortune, the shipping empire, the political connections." The words poured out of her like poison from a wound. 3 weeks ago, I was supposed to marry Richard Blackstone in a merger that would have made both families richer than God. James stared at her as if she were speaking a foreign language.
Sterling, as in Sterling Industries.
"Yes." "As in the Forbes list, private jets, senators on speed dial Sterling?" "Yes." James released her hands and stood up, pacing to the porch railing. Victoria watched his back, saw the moment he began to understand the magnitude of her deception. "This whole time, you've been lying to me." "To Sophie." "Yes." The car crash, the storm, running from an arranged marriage. All of it true, just not the whole truth. "James, please don't." He turned back to face her, and Victoria saw her own pain, reflected in his eyes. "Just don't. Let me think." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Victoria wanted to cross it, to throw herself at his feet and beg forgiveness. But she had forfeited that right the moment she chose to build their relationship on lies. "Why tell me now?" James asked finally. "Why not just disappear?" "Because they found me. Private investigators, photographs, threats." Victoria's voice broke. "My father knows about you, about Sophie. If I don't go back, if I don't marry one of the men he's chosen, he'll destroy you both. Media circus, investigations, reporters crawling through your life like ants. And if you do go back, Emma Harper disappears. You and Sophie grieve for a while, then move on with your lives." James laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut glass. "Move on, right? Like, it's that simple. It has to be. For who? For you? Or for us?" Victoria flinched as if he had slapped her. "For all of us. Don't you see? I can't give you the life you deserve. I can't be the mother Sophie needs. I'm poison, James. Everything I touch turns toxic. That's bullshit, and you know it. Is it? Look what's happened. 3 weeks of happiness, and now it all has to burn because of who I am." James crossed the distance between them in 2 quick strides, gripping her shoulders with hands that trembled with suppressed fury. "You want to know what I see when I look at you? I see a woman who risked everything to escape a prison made of gold. I see someone who taught my daughter to braid her hair and saved me from drowning in my own grief. I see the woman I fell in love with. You fell in love with Emma Harper. She doesn't exist." "She exists right here," James said, pressing his hand to her chest over her racing heart. "Emma Harper is who you chose to be when no one was watching. That's more real than any name or fortune or family legacy." Victoria closed her eyes, feeling Tears spill down her cheeks. It doesn't matter. They'll come for you anyway. My father doesn't make idle threats. Then we fight. With what? You're a carpenter, James. I'm a runaway heiress with no legal claim to my own life. They have armies of lawyers, private investigators, politicians in their pockets. We have nothing. We have each other. The simple words broke something inside Victoria's chest. She pulled away from his touch, wrapping her arms around herself like armor. That's not enough. It will never be enough. So you're just going to give up? Walk away from what we have? I'm trying to save what we had. Don't you understand? If I stay, if I fight this, Sophie becomes collateral damage. She'll see her father destroyed in the media, watch strangers tear apart the only stability she's ever known. Is your pride worth her childhood? The question hit James like a physical blow. Victoria saw the exact moment he realized she was right, saw him understand that loving her came with a price he couldn't ask his daughter to pay. There has to be another way, he said, but his voice had lost its conviction. There is, my Mary. Marcus Webb, a private investigator who wants a trophy wife for social events. In exchange, Emma Harper simply vanishes. No media attention, no investigations. You and Sophie get to keep your quiet life, and you get to live in another prison. Some prisons are more comfortable than others. James stared at her for a long moment, then turned away. I need to check on Sophie. Victoria watched him walk into the house, his shoulders bowed under the weight of a choice that wasn't really a choice at all. Through the window, she could see him standing in the doorway of Sophie's room, watching his daughter sleep. When he came back outside, something had changed in his face. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by the same terrible resignation Victoria carried in her own chest. When tomorrow morning, the wedding is Saturday, 5 days. Yes. Will you tell Sophie goodbye? Victoria shook her head. It would be cruel. Let her think Emma went away on a trip and never came back. Children are resilient. She'll forget me eventually. I won't. The words hung between them like a vow and a curse. Victoria stood up, knowing that if she stayed another moment, she would lose what little strength she had left. I have to go. Victoria. She stopped at the sound of her real name on his lips. For what it's worth, I would have fought them all. Every lawyer, every politician, every private investigator. I would have fought the whole damn world for you, Victoria. Closed her eyes, memorizing his voice, the weight of his love like sunlight on her skin. I know, she whispered. Yes. That's why I have to save you from yourself. She walked to his truck, keys heavy in her trembling hands. As she drove away, she could see James in the rearview mirror, standing on his front porch like a man watching his world end. Victoria Sterling was going home to choose her cage, Emma. Harper was dying with each mile that passed between them. And somewhere in the darkness ahead, Marcus Webb was waiting to claim his prize, never knowing that he was marrying a woman whose heart had already been buried in a woodworker's shop. Under paper flower crowns and the laughter of a 7-year-old girl who would never understand why Miss Emma had to say goodbye. Victoria stood in the same bridal suite where her first escape had begun, but this time, the ivory silk felt like a burial shroud. The morning lights streaming through the Gothic windows seemed dimmer, as if even the sun understood the nature of what was about to unfold. Her reflection stared back from the towering mirror, a hollow-eyed ghost wearing her grandmother's diamond tiara. 500 guests waited in the garden below, their chairs rearranged, their expectations adjusted for a different groom. Marcus Webb instead of Richard Blackstone, but the transaction remained the same. 3 sharp knocks on the door. Victoria. It's time. Harold Sterling's voice carried the satisfaction of a man who had won a war through superior strategy and ruthless execution. His wayward daughter had finally learned her place in the grand design of his empire. Just a moment, Father. Victoria's hands didn't shake as she reached for her purse, didn't tremble as she withdrew the small recording device she had activated during yesterday's meeting in Harold's study. Webb's cold proposition, her father's threats, Richard's casual cruelty. All of it captured in digital amber, ready to be released to every media outlet in the country. She had learned something important from her father over the years. The most devastating weapons were often the quietest ones. Victoria. Harold's voice carried a note of impatience. She opened the door to find him waiting in the hallway, resplendent in his morning coat and the aura of absolute authority. Behind him stood two men she didn't recognize, dressed like security, but moving with the fluid grace of predators. "Insurance," Harold said, following her gaze. "To ensure there are no more dramatic exits." Victoria smiled, the expression sharp enough to cut glass. "Of course, father. Heaven forbid I embarrass you again." They descended the grand staircase together, a king escorting his daughter to the altar of political necessity. The mansion's foyer buzzed with activity photographers adjusting their equipment, wedding coordinators speaking in urgent whispers, society matrons comparing jewels and gossip in equal measure. Marcus Webb waited at the foot of the stairs, impeccable. In his tailored tuxedo, his winter ice eyes appraising Victoria like a man inspecting his newest acquisition. He took her hand and raised it to his lips, the gesture performed for the cameras rather than affection. "You look radiant, my dear," he murmured against her knuckles. "Don't," Victoria said quietly. "Not even for show." Webb's smile never wavered, but something dangerous flickered in his eyes. "We'll need to discuss your boundaries after the ceremony. I find defiant wives require more creative management." Victoria felt Harold's hand settle on her shoulder, fingers digging in just hard enough to remind her of the consequences of rebellion. "Shall we proceed?" her father asked. They moved through the mansion's French doors onto the terrace overlooking the garden. The same white roses cascaded from every surface, their perfume thick enough to choke on. The same string quartet played something saccharine that made Victoria's stomach turn. The same 500 guests sat in their silk and summer suits, ready to witness another Sterling family triumph. But something was different. In the back row, partially hidden by a massive floral arrangement, Victoria spotted two figures that made her heart stop. James sat rigidly upright, in an ill-fitting suit, his face carved from granite and grief. Beside him, Sophie fidgeted in a yellow dress, her honey-colored hair braided with small white flowers. They had come. Victoria's step faltered, and Harold's grip on her arm tightened to the point of pain. "Keep walking," he hissed in her ear. "Whatever foolish notion is in your head, abandon it now." But Victoria wasn't looking at her father anymore. She was staring at the small sign James held in his lap, carefully lettered in Sophie's 7-year-old handwriting, "We love you, Miss Emma." The child had no idea what she was witnessing, but James understood perfectly. I had brought his daughter to watch the woman they both loved sacrifice herself on the altar of her father's ambitions. Victoria felt something crack inside her chest, a sound like ice breaking under pressure. "I can't do this," she whispered. "You will," Harold replied. "Will. Or I will have them arrested for trespassing and ensure that Carpenter spends the next 5 years fighting false criminal charges." Victoria looked at her father, really looked at him, and saw him clearly for perhaps the first time in her life. The steel empire, the political connections, the vast fortune, all of it built on the bones of people who had dared to stand in Harold Sterling's way. She thought of her grandmother, who had died alone in a nursing home because she had questioned one of Harold's business deals. She thought of her mother, who had retreated into prescription pills and voluntary exile rather than face another day of being a beautiful ornament in Harold's grand design. She thought of James, who had opened his door to a stranger in a storm and offered her the first real home she had ever known. "No," Victoria said. The word fell into the garden like a stone into still water, sending ripples of shocked silence through the assembled guests. "Victoria," Harold's voice carried warning, and promise in equal measure. "No," she said again, louder this time. "I will not marry Marcus Webb. I will not be sold like livestock to seal your business deals. I'll not spend the rest of my life paying for the crime of being born your daughter." Murmurs rippled through the crowd like wind through wheat. Photographers raised their cameras, sensing blood in the water. Webb's hand moved to Victoria's wrist, his fingers circling her pulse point like a shackle. "You're being hysterical," he said smoothly, his voice pitched for the watching crowd. "Wedding nerves, perfectly natural. Let go of me." "I don't." So, Webb's grip tightened, his fingers finding pressure points with practiced precision. "We're going to finish this ceremony, and then we're going to have a very long conversation about your attitude." Victoria looked up into his winter eyes and saw her future reflected there. Years of careful submission, of being molded and shaped into the perfect society wife. Years of dying by degrees until nothing remained of Emma Harper or Victoria Sterling except a beautiful shell performing its assigned role. "Actually," said a voice from the crowd, "I think the lady asked you to let go." Every head in the garden turned toward the back row where James had risen from his chair. He moved through the assembled guests with the steady purpose of a man who had finally found something worth fighting for. Sophie's small hand clutched in his own. "Mr. Mitchell," Harold's voice could have frozen hellfire. "You are not welcome here." "Didn't figure I was," James replied, his eyes never leaving Victoria's face. "But I had something to say, and I wanted to say it in front of all these fine people." Webb released Victoria's wrist, his hand moving toward the inside of his jacket where Victoria glimpsed the outline of a weapon. "James, don't," Victoria said, but her voice carried no strength. James stopped 3 feet away from the altar, close enough that Victoria could see the love and determination burning in his brown eyes. "Emma Harper," he said, and the name carried across the garden like a benediction. "No, that's not your legal name, but it's who you are when you're not trying to be who other people want you to be." "This is highly irregular," the minister began, but Harold silenced him with a look. "You asked me once what I saw when I looked at you," James continued. "I see a woman who read bedtime stories to my daughter like she was her own. I see someone who taught me that maybe the best things in life are worth fighting for, even when the fight seems impossible." Victoria felt tears streaming down her cheeks, but she couldn't speak. "So I'm here to make you an offer, Emma Harper. It's not Victoria Sterling, the heiress. Not the daughter of Harold Sterling, or the future wife of Marcus Webb. Emma Harper. The woman who makes paper flower crowns and knows the difference between love and possession." James reached into his jacket and withdrew a small wooden box, hand-carved, and polished to a warm glow. "I know I can't compete with mansions and private jets and all the things money can buy," he said, dropping to one knee in the center of the garden while 500 guests held their collective breath. "But I can offer you something none of these other men can." He opened the box to reveal a simple ring carved from the same wood as the box, inlaid with small stones that caught the morning light like captured stars. "I can offer you choice, real choice. The choice to be loved for who you are instead of what you represent. The choice to build something together instead of being bought and sold like property." Victoria looked at the ring, then at James, then at Sophie, who was bouncing on her toes with excitement even though she didn't fully understand what was happening. "Emma Harper," James said, his voice carrying across the silent garden. "Will you marry me?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Victoria felt the weight of 500 stares, the pressure of her father's fury, the cold calculation in Marcus Webb's winter eyes. She looked at Harold Sterling, the man who had controlled every moment of her life since birth, and saw him for what he truly was. Not her father, but her first and most persistent captor. She looked at Marcus Webb, who had offered to buy her like a racehorse, and saw the chains he would wrap around her soul disguised as freedom. She looked at James Mitchell, who held nothing but his calloused hands and his daughter's love, and saw the only real choice she had ever been offered. "Yes," Victoria said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry I didn't hear you," James said, his eyes twinkling despite the gravity of the moment. "Yes," Victoria shouted, loud enough for every guest in the garden to hear. "Yes, James Mitchell, I will marry you." The garden erupted into chaos. Harold's roar of fury mixed with the excited chatter of guests, the rapid-fire clicking of cameras, and Sophie's delighted squeal of "Daddy's getting married." Webb moved toward Victoria, his hand inside his jacket, but found himself face to face with 2 of Harold's security men. "I think it's time for you to leave, Mr. Webb," Harold said, his voice deadly quiet. "You can't be serious. We had a deal. The deal is off." Harold looked at his daughter, and Victoria saw something she had never expected in his steel-gray eyes. Respect. It seems Victoria has made her choice. Webb looked around the garden, outnumbered and outmaneuvered, then smiled with cold promise. "Isn't over, Miss Sterling?" "Actually," Victoria said, pulling the recording device from her purse and holding it up for everyone to see, "it is. Unless you'd like me to play your marriage proposal for these fine people, I think they'd find it educational." Webb's face went white, then mottled red. Without another word, he pushed through the crowd and disappeared into the mansion. Harold approached Victoria slowly, as if she were a wild animal that might bolt at any sudden movement. "You realize this means you're disinherited," he said. "Cut off completely. No trust fund, no family support, nothing." Victoria looked at James, who was lifting Sophie onto his shoulders so she could see over the crowd. She looked at the ring, box in her hands, at the simple wooden band that represented everything money couldn't buy. "I know," she said. Harold studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Your grandmother would have been proud," he said quietly. "She always said you had more steel in your spine than the rest of us combined." "Father, go," Harold said, his voice rough with something that might have been love, "before I change my mind and have him arrested for disturbing the peace." Victoria kissed her father's cheek, tasting the salt of her own tears. "Goodbye, Father. Goodbye, Victoria." She turned away from Harold Sterling, from the mansion that had been her prison, from the life that had never really been hers to live. She walked through the crowd of astonished guests toward the man who had taught her the difference between being owned and being loved. James swept her into his arms, spinning her around while Sophie cheered and the photographers captured every moment of the Sterling family's most spectacular scandal. "Are you sure about this?" James whispered against her ear. "No money, no mansion, no safety net, just us." Victoria laughed through her tears, feeling lighter than she had in 24 years. "Just us," she agreed. "Emma, Harper, and her family." They left the garden hand in hand, Sophie skipping between them, chattering about how she was going to be the best flower girl at their real wedding. Behind them, the wreckage of Victoria Sterling's old life smoldered in the morning sun. 6 months later, Harper married James Mitchell in a small ceremony behind their woodworking shop. Sophie was the flower girl, wearing the paper crown she had made for Emma on that first day. The only guests were James's sister and her family, the pastor from the local church, and Harold Sterling, who sat in the back row and wept tears he thought he had forgotten how to cry. Victoria's trust fund remained locked away, her inheritance donated to charity by a father who finally understood that some things couldn't be bought or sold or controlled, but Emma Harper had everything she had ever wanted. A husband who saw her as a partner rather than a possession. A daughter who called her mom and saved her best drawings for the refrigerator door. A home built on love instead of obligation. And on quiet evenings, when the workshop was closed and Sophie was tucked safely in her bed, Emma and James would sit on their front porch and watch the sunset paint the sky in shades of freedom. She had traded an empire for a woodworking shop, a fortune for a paper flower crown, a name that opened doors for a love that opened hearts. It was the best bargain she had ever made. The end asterisk like this video, if the story touched your heart, subscribe for more emotional tales, and share with someone who believes in the power of true love, and let us know in the comments. We love connecting with our global community of romance lovers.